My fiancé left his son with me for 7 days to help his ex, who was going through severe emotional problems, but it cost me my marriage. The day he lined up little orange pill bottles across my kitchen counter like he was setting out party favors, I still thought I was about to marry a decent man. Not a perfect one, obviously, I'm not 12. He was divorced, tired, a little conflict allergic, and way too good at saying things like, let's not make this harder than it needs to be, when what he really meant was, let's make this easier for me. But I loved him. And worse than that, I had built real routines around loving him. His son's medication alarms were saved in my phone. There was a spare set of dinosaur pajamas in my dryer because the boy always dripped toothpaste down the front when he stayed over. I knew which cartoon could calm him down after a rough day, and which snack he'd suddenly hate because a texture offended him for reasons known only to children, and whichever higher power assigns them personalities. I knew how to count the seconds during a seizure scare without letting my voice shake. That part matters, because 6 months earlier, when his son got diagnosed with epilepsy, all of us had closed ranks around that kid like the diagnosis had snapped us into one shape. Him, his ex-wife, the boy's grandparents. The boys. Me. It felt messy sometimes, but it also felt real. Like the inconvenient real that grown-up love comes with. My name is Corinne, and at that point I was 2 months into being engaged, 3 years into the relationship, and embarrassingly proud of how mature I thought I was handling the whole blended family thing. I worked as a project coordinator for a small medical billing office, which sounds boring because it is, but it paid my rent on time, kept health insurance in my life, and let me work from home a few days a week. He used to bring me coffee on those mornings and kiss my forehead while I sat there in old pajama shorts trying to make a spreadsheet look less like a hostage situation. He had helped me repaint my apartment when I moved. He remembered dumb little details about me, like the fact that I hate bananas but love banana flavoring, which is a character flaw I'm aware of. Thank you. He could be kind in a steady, domestic way that sneaks up on you. That's probably why I ignored the parts that didn't feel good. His ex-wife was one of those women who never raised her voice, and still somehow managed to act like the room belonged to her. She wasn't cartoon villain evil. She wasn't throwing drinks or sending midnight threats. She just had that polished, exhausting confidence of someone who assumed everyone would adapt around her. If she changed the pickup schedule, it was because it made more sense. If she decided a school event needed to include everybody, it was because that was best for their son. If I looked surprised by a last-minute shift in plans, she'd tilt her head like she was confused why a reasonable adult would need advance notice to exist. The first time she rearranged one of our weekends without asking, he shrugged and told me it was easier to just go with it. The first time she called during our date night and kept him on the phone for 40 minutes over a non-emergency, he mouthed sorry at me while I pushed cold fries around my plate and told myself this was what maturity looked like. The monthly dinners with the 3 of them, and the boy felt weird at first, then normal, then weird again. Sometimes they would fall into shorthand from their marriage, and I'd sit there smiling with a fork in my hand, feeling like a polite guest at my own future. Still, the wedding was only a few months away. We had looked at a small venue outside the city with cheap string lights and ugly carpeting and somehow made it feel romantic anyway. I had started keeping a note in my phone with possible songs and table ideas. He joked that he was happy to marry a woman who could survive both his mother and his ex-wife. And I laughed because that's what women do when a man turns a warning into a compliment. My own mother thought I was lucky. She liked to say no relationship comes without baggage, which coming from the woman who spent most of my childhood teaching me to make myself smaller in the name of peace was not exactly shocking. My younger brother said he liked my fiancé because he seemed steady. My older sister said marrying a man with a kid meant I'd better get used to never being first. She said it with a smile while stealing fries off my plate, and I smiled back because in my family, if somebody insults you lightly enough, you're supposed to call it honesty and move on. So when he showed up on a Tuesday evening looking pale and distracted and said his ex-wife was having some kind of emotional crisis, I didn't go straight to suspicion. I went straight to logistics. That's my disease. He said it would just be 2 or 3 days, maybe less, and asked if I could keep his son at my place because the boy was calmer with me, and his parents were getting older and couldn't handle the stairs at their house easily. He said his ex-wife needed privacy, needed support, needed him there because she was falling apart and didn't want other people involved yet. He said all of this while unscrewing caps and pointing at labels and writing times on sticky notes like he was preparing a substitute teacher. At some point, I asked where exactly he was going to be and how I was supposed to reach him if something happened. He looked away for half a second, which on him was a flare gun. Then he said he'd have his phone, just not constantly, because the situation was delicate. Delicate. Men love a vague word when they're about to dump an actual problem in your lap. I should tell you I almost said no. Not because of the boy. Never because of him. I almost said no because something inside me tightened. Not a dramatic movie feeling. More like that annoying little internal cough of instinct you spend years learning to ignore because otherwise you'd never date anybody. But then his son came in carrying the stuffed shark he slept with at our place. And my fiancé kissed my cheek and thanked me like I was saving the world instead of agreeing to a few extra school nights. And I did what I always did when a situation felt off, and I wanted to be loved more than I wanted to be right. I swallowed it. The first night was fine. We did homework at my kitchen table. I made pasta with butter because that was one of the 3 foods he trusted consistently that month. We reviewed the seizure plan again before bed. He asked if his dad would be back before the weekend, and I said probably, because that was what I had been told. He nodded like kids do when they sense adults are bluffing and don't have the energy to challenge it. After he fell asleep in the second bedroom, I stood in the doorway longer than necessary and watched his little chest move under the blanket. Not because I was being sentimental, because I was suddenly aware that if anything happened, I was the grown-up in charge. By the second day, I was running my work calls with one ear on cartoon theme songs and the other on the medication alarms. My boss was already irritated because we had a hospital account audit coming up, and I had told her I might need a little flexibility for a family emergency without getting into details. Family emergency. That phrase looked ridiculous on my screen when I typed it, because technically it wasn't my family, except it was, until it wasn't. The third day, I missed part of a planning call because the school nurse called to clarify one of his medications, and then his teacher sent a message about a permission slip I had never seen. I texted my fiancé 3 times in one afternoon, once asking if he could call the school because they wanted confirmation about pickup permissions, once asking how his ex-wife was doing, once asking more directly when he was coming back. He answered after dinner with 3 short messages that somehow made me feel like I was bothering him. He said things were still rough. He said thanks again for handling things. He said he'd explain later. Explain what later exactly? That part I didn't ask because if you've ever dated somebody who avoids conflict for sport, you know how quickly you can end up doing half the avoidance for them. By the 5th day, the sticky note schedule on my counter had coffee rings on it. My apartment looked like a toy store had been robbed in a hurry, and I had started sleeping lightly enough that every creak of the building made me sit up. His son had a small episode that wasn't a full seizure, but was close enough to send adrenaline through my whole body. He got glassy-eyed for a second while we were brushing teeth, and I walked him to the couch and talked in the calm voice I had practiced even while my own heart was trying to claw out of my ribs. He was okay. That's the important part. He was okay. But after he fell asleep, I went into my bathroom, shut the door, and cried sitting on the edge of the tub with one hand over my mouth because I was scared and furious and too embarrassed to admit either one out loud. The next morning, my boss called me instead of emailing, which is never a good sign. She asked, in that crisp professional voice people use when they want credit for not sounding cruel, whether I was still committed to leading the project I'd been assigned. I said yes immediately, too quickly, like a liar. She reminded me that the team needed reliability right now. Reliability. I almost laughed. I had become the emergency contact for a child who wasn't mine because a grown man wanted to manage my reaction to something I still didn't understand. And somehow I was the one being warned about reliability. I tried again that afternoon. I called him during my lunch break while his son sat next to me eating crackers and watching a nature show with all the seriousness of a tiny retired man. He didn't pick up. I called again after bedtime, straight to voicemail. Then, at almost 11, he sent a message that just said, "Sorry, long day, talk tomorrow, no explanation, no details, no actual tomorrow." A week in, I woke up at 4 because I'd forgotten to switch off an old alarm and my body thought I was late for medicine. The apartment was dark and too quiet, and there's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being exhausted in somebody else's crisis. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting backwards from 10 the way the neurologist had taught us to stay calm during a flare-up, and realized I no longer knew when this arrangement was supposed to end. I also realized, in a way that made me feel physically sick, that I still did not know where he was. The stupid thing is that I defended him even inside my own head. Maybe it's worse than it sounds. Maybe the ex-wife really is falling apart. Maybe he's sleeping on a couch in some relative's house and barely holding things together. Maybe I'm being selfish for wanting details while somebody else is in pain. Women can build a whole prison out of maybes. I was practically laying bricks by then. 3 days later, on Thursday afternoon, everything blew open. His son was in the living room building a lopsided fort out of couch cushions, and I was on my laptop pretending to care about a spreadsheet nobody was going to thank me for. I opened a social media app because my brain needed a break, and there it was. A cluster of photos posted by one of his friends, all sunburned smiles and bright drinks and that aggressively cheerful light you only get in tropical places. I recognized his face before my mind even caught up to what I was seeing. He was standing in the middle of a group on a beach, grinning with one arm slung around some friend from college, wearing the shirt I bought him last fall because he said it made his shoulders look less tired. In the next photo, his ex-wife was next to him, holding up her left hand. Ring. Huge ring. The caption was something gushy about love, fresh starts, and saying yes in paradise. I stared so long my eyes started watering. I checked the date. It had been posted that day. I clicked through the rest with that cold, floating feeling people always describe right before they pass out or throw up. Sunset dinner, poolside drinks, group selfie. Him in the background of one video laughing while somebody shouted congratulations. There was no crisis, no emergency, no private emotional breakdown. He was on vacation. He had left his sick child with me under false pretenses so he could go celebrate his ex-wife getting engaged. I wish I could say my first reaction was anger, because anger is cleaner. It would make me sound less humiliatingly sincere. My first reaction was confusion so complete it almost felt like stupidity. I genuinely tried to make it make sense. Maybe the photos were old. Maybe the caption was a joke. Maybe there was some explanation where I wasn't being treated like free childcare by a man I was planning to marry. Then his son padded into the kitchen in mismatched socks and asked if he could have the animal crackers with frosting on them. And I heard myself say, "Sure, baby," like nothing in my chest had just been split open. I texted him immediately. Not politely. Not well. I asked where he was. I asked if he was seriously at a beach while I was taking his son to school and giving him medication and missing work. I asked if he had lost his mind. I watched the typing bubble appear and disappear twice before he finally answered with a message so casual I still get hot thinking about it. "Calm down. I'll explain when I get back. Please keep him a few more days." A few more days. That was the sentence that broke something, not the beach photo. Not even the lie, if I'm being honest. It was the entitlement of that message, the assumption that I would stay in position, keep performing this labor, absorb the fear and responsibility and humiliation, and wait neatly on a shelf until he returned with whatever explanation he thought would get him through the door. I spent the next hour moving around my apartment like a person who had forgotten how furniture worked. I picked up my phone, put it down, opened the fridge, shut it again, checked the medication schedule, looked at the boy, looked away. He was on the rug with his stuffed shark, humming to himself, and every possible option felt ugly. Keep him there and wait for a man who had already shown me exactly what I was to him. Hand him off to somebody without proper medical instructions. Pretend I could do this indefinitely. I tried calling my fiancé twice. No answer. I searched my old messages for his parents' numbers and realized every time plans had been made before, they had gone through him. Of course they had. Control freaks don't always look controlling. Sometimes they just make sure every road goes through them. I called again. Straight to voicemail. Then I did the thing I still hate admitting out loud. I called the county non-emergency line because I didn't know what else to do, and because fear had finally beaten shame. My voice was shaking so badly, the woman on the phone asked me twice to repeat myself. I told her I had been left caring for a 7-year-old child with epilepsy under false pretenses, that I did not have legal guardianship, that the father was out of town and refusing to return, and that I was scared of what would happen if there was a medical emergency. Even as I said it, part of me was horrified. I sounded dramatic. Hysterical. Like every stereotype women get handed the second they stop being convenient. But then the boy's 6 o'clock alarm went off from my phone and I had to pause the call to give him medicine with my free hand. And the woman on the line went very quiet in a way that told me I wasn't overreacting nearly as much as I'd been told my whole life. 2 officers came first, then a caseworker. Nobody stormed in. Nobody treated me like I was a criminal mastermind ruining lives for fun. They asked questions. I showed them the messages and the photos and the pill bottles lined up on my counter like evidence from the world's saddest scavenger hunt. The caseworker spoke to me in a steady, matter-of-fact tone that made me feel both relieved and more ashamed somehow. She asked whether there were grandparents, an aunt, anybody local. I said yes, his parents, but I didn't have their number. She made a call, then another. Everything took longer than I thought it would. The boy got scared when strangers started using soft voices around him. He asked where his dad was. He asked if he had done something wrong. That part will probably live under my skin forever. When his grandparents finally arrived, the grandfather looked stunned and angry in that stiff old man way, where the anger is mostly at reality for requiring emotion in public. The grandmother was the one who knelt down and opened her arms. The boy went to her fast, But he kept looking back at me like I might explain the plot. I couldn't. I helped pack his bag because apparently that is the kind of punishment life invents when it feels creative. I folded dinosaur pajamas with my hands shaking. I tucked in the stuffed shark. I wrote down the medication times even though they already knew them, because suddenly not doing something with my hands felt impossible. Right before he left, he asked if he was still coming back to my apartment after the weekend. I said, "I don't know, sweetheart." And then I had to turn away because my face had stopped cooperating. The second the door shut behind them, the apartment went silent in this brutal, unnatural way. There were toy cars under my coffee table and a half-finished drawing on the couch and a little cup in the sink with cartoon fish on it. And I stood there in the middle of all of it, feeling like the worst person alive. Then my phone started ringing. He was screaming before I even got hello out. Not raised voice upset, full yelling. He demanded to know what I had done. He said I had traumatized his son. He said I had humiliated him in front of his parents. He said, "How could you?" And that was the moment whatever was left of my restraint just burst like a cheap pipe. I shouted right back. I told him he had lied to me, used me, dumped medical responsibility for his child on me, and flown off to celebrate another woman's engagement while I rearranged my life around his mess. I told him I had spent a week terrified of a seizure happening while he sipped drinks on a beach. He kept saying it wasn't like that, and I kept saying then, what exactly was it like? Because from where I was standing it looked an awful lot like cowardice with good lighting. He tried to come back to the line about his son being innocent. And I remember saying, yes, he is, which is why his father should have acted like a father instead of a teenager avoiding a hard conversation. I was so angry I was shaking. He was too. There was nothing tidy about it. No smart final line. I just hung up when he started talking over me again, then blocked his number before I could lose my nerve. The next morning, I called in sick, which I almost never did because I had been raised by the kind of mother who thinks pneumonia is a scheduling issue. Then I started packing his things. Not in one dramatic sweep with music playing in the background. Just one stupid item at a time. His sneakers by the door. The hoodie he kept forgetting on my couch. His charger from my bedroom. The razor he left by my sink. Tiny domestic leftovers of a man who had managed to make himself feel like family in the quiet spaces of my life. Halfway through, I found one of the boys' toy cars under the couch and sat down hard on the floor because my legs went weak. I held that little plastic thing in my palm and cried so hard I gave myself a headache. By late afternoon, I had stacked his boxes in the hallway outside my apartment door because I didn't trust myself not to throw something if he came inside. He showed up just after dark. I knew it was him from the knock. Funny how quickly somebody's knock can turn from comfort to threat. I didn't open the door. I stood on the other side, barefoot, gripping the lock like that did anything, while he said my name in the exhausted voice men use when they've decided you're being emotional and they're the victim of your tone. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said the trip had been planned around a mutual friend proposing to his ex-wife. He said he knew I'd be upset about him going away with her and the group, especially with their son not going, and he panicked. He thought if he told me the truth beforehand, I'd turn it into a fight. So he lied. That was his explanation. Not that he had no choice. Not that somebody's life was at stake. He just wanted to avoid a difficult conversation and decided I could absorb the fallout later. Standing there with the door between us, I started remembering a dozen little moments I had filed away under not worth it. The times he canceled plans after she called. The times decisions about the boys' school, doctor visits, or schedule were made before I even knew there was a discussion. The way he always wanted credit for peace while somebody else, usually me, paid for it in swallowed feelings. He kept saying he was sorry and that he'd made a mistake and that he hadn't known how to handle it. I remember thinking, no, you handled it exactly the way you always do. You picked the easiest route for yourself and left somebody else to clean up the mess. I opened the door just enough to hold out the ring box. I had put the engagement ring back in it after taking it off that morning, which was harder than I thought it would be and somehow also not hard enough. He looked down at it and then at me like he honestly believed there was still a version of the evening where I let him in and we worked through it over tea, like civilized adults in a counseling brochure. I told him I was done. I told him he didn't get to lie to me about something this serious and then lecture me about trust. He asked if I was really ending our relationship over one stupid decision, and I almost laughed in his face. One stupid decision. Men really will condense an entire character pattern into a single unfortunate event if they think it'll save them. So yes, I gave him the ring. And no, I didn't do it gracefully. My hand was shaking, my face was blotchy. I said you always choose what protects you, and then I shut the door before he could answer, because I knew if I let him keep talking, I'd start doubting my own pulse. The weird thing about ending an engagement is that the dramatic part is short. The humiliating administrative part goes on forever. You still have his name in the Notes app next to wedding ideas. You still have a fitting appointment reminder on your calendar. Your aunt texts, asking if you want the folding card box she used for her daughter's reception, and you have to decide whether to answer honestly or fake your own death. The weekend after I gave the ring back, I canceled the venue visit, the florist consultation, and the little bakery tasting I had been irrationally excited about because they did tiny lemon cakes with blackberry filling. The woman at the bakery was kinder than I deserved. She said, "Oh, honey, I'm sorry," in a voice so gentle it nearly sent me through the floor. Meanwhile, my apartment felt haunted by routine. My phone still tried to remind me about medication times for 2 days before I realized I hadn't deleted the alarms. The first time one went off at bedtime, I bolted upright from the couch and then just sat there listening to it ring until it stopped. I kept passing the second bedroom and expecting to hear cartoon sound effects, or the thump of little feet jumping off the mattress after I had specifically said no jumping. I found one of his socks in the laundry 3 days later and stood in my hallway holding it like I had uncovered evidence of a civilization that no longer existed. I also, because apparently humiliation likes company, had to keep going to work. The Monday after everything blew up, I went into the office because hiding at home with my thoughts felt medically unwise. My boss took one look at my face and asked if I was sick. I said no, just tired, which was technically true if you ignore the emotional crater. Work had already suffered. I had missed deadlines, handed off tasks badly, and sent at least one email with the wrong attachment because my brain had been split between claim codes and pediatric medication. I spent the entire morning overcorrecting like a woman auditioning for reliability. By lunch, I had a tension headache so sharp I could feel it in my teeth. Then my mother called. You can probably guess how that went if you've ever had a mother who mistakes endurance for virtue. She had heard from my sister that the engagement was off. My sister had heard from my brother, and my brother had heard from me in the watered-down version I gave him because I still had some dignity left and was trying to preserve it like jam in a panic. My mother asked what happened in the tone people use when they already have a theory and are just waiting for you to confirm it. I told her the short version. He lied. He left his son with me under false pretenses. I found out he was on vacation. I ended it. There was a pause on the line, and then she said, "Well, you didn't have to overreact with the authorities. I nearly dropped my sandwich," she went on, calm as a weather report, about how men make mistakes, how blended families are complicated, how sick children need stability, how maybe I should have waited for him to get back instead of escalating things. Escalating. That word again. As if I had launched a missile instead of calling for help because I had no legal standing, no guardian paperwork, and no honest timeline from the child's father. I said, maybe louder than I needed to, that her definition of overreacting was always suspiciously close to a woman having boundaries. She got offended, naturally. My mother can walk into a room full of broken glass and somehow end up hurt that somebody raised their voice near her. By the end of the call, she was sighing about how I always make everything harder. I hung up first, which in my family counts as a revolutionary act. My sister was worse because she wrapped cruelty in practicality. She texted, "You were right to leave him, but calling outsiders about the kid was messy." Messy. I stared at that word for a solid minute, as if there had been a neat version of what happened, as if my choices had been keep the child indefinitely with no information, magically summon the grandparents from thin air, or accept being told I should protect everybody else's comfort while mine burned. I didn't answer her. Not because I was taking the high road, because if I had answered, it would have been with something I couldn't take back, and I was already tired of being the designated unstable woman in every story. The messages from his people started after that, not all at once, drip by drip. One of his friends saying he knew things looked bad but there had been a misunderstanding. Another saying the boy was upset and asking for me, which was a cruel thing to tell me and also, I suspect, not entirely accidental. One of the wives in that social group told me I should think about what kind of trauma I had caused by involving strangers when the child was already dealing with a medical condition. I read that one sitting in my car outside a grocery store and laughed so suddenly a man loading bottled water into his trunk looked concerned. Trauma. That word from them. As if his father abandoning him with me under a lie didn't count because it was done politely. Still, the guilt got me where the judgment couldn't. Every time somebody mentioned the boy asking for me, something inside me folded. I knew he had been frightened. I knew he didn't understand why adults he trusted had started acting like the floor was unstable. My anger at his father did not cancel that out. That's the awful part about being right in a situation where a child gets hurt. There's no victory in it. You don't get your instincts validated and then suddenly feel clean. You just get extra grief layered over the first kind. At night, I'd replay the transfer over and over. The look on his face. The way I avoided answering because any answer would have been a lie or a burden no 7-year-old should have to carry. I started leaving the television on until I fell asleep, because silence made room for memory in a way I couldn't tolerate. Twice that week, I woke up already reaching for my phone to check medication alarms that no longer existed. Once I actually got out of bed, walked halfway down the hallway, and only stopped when I saw the second bedroom dark and empty. I leaned against the wall and laughed the kind of laugh that sounds like your body has given up on distinguishing between humor and pain. A week and a half later, his ex-wife showed up at my apartment. She arrived in the middle of a Saturday afternoon while I was cleaning out my fridge and throwing away leftovers like a woman trying to regain control of 1 square foot of existence. When I opened the door and saw her standing there in nice jeans and that composed face, I almost closed it immediately. Instead, I froze, which I hate about myself. She said she wanted to talk. I said I didn't. She said it would just take a minute. That was a lie. Obviously. People who say just a minute are the same people who borrow emotional space like they're entitled to the lease. So she came in, because I was caught off guard and because some terrible piece of my upbringing still thinks being rude is a worse sin than being invaded. She looked around my living room like she was trying to assess damage after a storm. Then she sat on the edge of my couch and thanked me for helping with her son during a difficult week. I actually blinked at her. The nerve of it. Thanked me. Like this was a delayed thank you note after a bake sale. She apologized first, sort of. She said if she had known he lied about why he was going, she never would have let things play out the way they did. Which sounded generous until I noticed she never actually apologized for calling him away. Never apologized for the situation itself. Never apologized for the fact that the people around them had apparently all known more than I did. Then the real reason she was there slipped out. She said he was devastated. She said he wasn't sleeping. She said he loved me and had made a stupid decision out of fear. She said maybe, for the sake of the boy, I could at least talk to him again. There it was. Not concern for me. Not concern for boundaries. Damage control. She had come to my apartment to help manage a man's emotional consequences with the same brisk competence she probably brought to school forms and holiday logistics. I asked if she was seriously there to ask me to take him back. She said not exactly, then immediately started explaining why I should consider it. She said families are complicated. She said co-parenting sometimes creates weird gray areas. She said he'd been trying to spare my feelings. I'm sorry, but if a woman tells me a man lied to spare my feelings, I'm going to hear I personally recycle gaslighting and call it empathy. I told her to leave, calmly at first. She stayed seated. She said I was being unfair. She said all of us had been trying to keep things stable for the boy. All of us. That phrase hit me harder than it probably should have because it revealed what I had started suspecting the second I saw those beach photos. I wasn't inside their family system. I was adjacent to it. Useful to it. Welcomed when convenient. Expected to bend when necessary. But never truly given the same courtesy as the people who had history before me. I told her again to leave. She stood up but kept talking, which honestly might be my least favorite adult behavior after lying. When somebody is already in motion toward the door and still treating your threshold like a debate stage. She said I had overreacted. She said the call I made had consequences for her son. She said if I really loved him, I would try to repair the rupture instead of adding to it. That was when I stopped caring about politeness altogether. I stepped toward the door, opened it, and said, "Get out." She kept arguing, not yelling. Somehow the composed version was worse. Then she put one hand on the door frame like she was grounding herself there, and I took her by the upper arm and pushed her firmly outside. Not a punch. Not a dramatic shove down the hallway. Just enough force to move a woman who was refusing to leave my home. She stumbled back a step, looked shocked, and I shut the door in her face so hard a picture frame rattled in the hallway. Afterward, I stood there shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor. I wasn't proud of touching her. I also wasn't sorry I made her leave. Both things can be true. That's another adult lesson nobody puts on greeting cards. He called from a different number that evening. I answered because I thought it might be work. Rookie mistake. The second I heard his voice, every muscle in my back locked. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask if I was okay. He opened with, "Did you put your hands on her?" I was honestly impressed by the speed. That man could sprint straight past the original betrayal and arrive at my reaction before most people finish saying hello. I told him she had refused to leave my apartment. He said she had gone there trying to help. I said help whom? He ignored that. He started talking about how his son was confused and upset, how his parents were furious, how people were asking questions, how this entire situation had spun out of control because I'd made everything public. Public. Again, amazing. A week on a beach with a group of friends who knew I was home medicating? His kid apparently didn't count as public. My call for help did. Somewhere in the middle of his speech, I realized he was not trying to repair anything. He was trying to establish a version. In his version, he was a flawed but loving father who made one panicked mistake. His ex-wife was a peacekeeping co-parent, and I was the unstable fiancé who overreacted. Involved officials, put hands on a woman, and blew up a family over jealousy. Once I heard the structure of it, I couldn't unhear it. The careful emphasis on my tone, my call, my push at the doorway. Nothing about the original lie except as context for my behavior. Everything about narrative management. I told him if he kept contacting me after I asked him not to, I would speak to an attorney about harassment. I didn't actually have one lined up. I had a legal plan about as developed as a wet napkin, but the word attorney works on certain men the way a spray bottle works on cats. He went quiet for a second, then said I was being dramatic. I said maybe, but don't call again. Then I blocked that number too. Over the next few weeks, I built a whole little routine out of surviving embarrassment. Wake up too early, stare at the ceiling, go to work, pretend to care about insurance appeals, eat dinner over my sink like a raccoon. Ignore messages from people who suddenly felt qualified to grade my behavior under pressure. Repeat. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I muted my family group chat because my sister kept sending vague little comments about pride and consequences like she was writing fortune cookies for women she disliked. My brother checked in more gently. He said he thought the whole thing was messed up and that our mother was being unfair, which nearly made me cry because in my family, straightforward support feels like somebody handed you $1 million and a safe place to sleep. One Tuesday after work, I sat in my car outside my apartment for almost 40 minutes because I didn't want to go in. The quiet of that place had changed. Before, it used to feel peaceful in the adult way. Bills paid. Dishes done. Bra off. Good night. After everything, the quiet felt like absence with utilities. I finally went upstairs, opened the door, and found a folded drawing paper under my doormat. No note. Just a child's drawing in thick marker. 3 figures holding hands. One taller, one medium, one small. The small one had a shark in the other hand. I sat right there in the hallway and started crying before I even made it to the signature, which was a scribble version of the boy's name I had seen on school papers a dozen times. I never found out who left it. One of the grandparents, maybe. Maybe his father had done one decent thing in the middle of all this and passed it along. Maybe the boy himself had insisted. I don't know. What I do know is that I shoved that drawing in my kitchen junk drawer because seeing it felt like being peeled. I couldn't throw it away, and I couldn't leave it out. That ended up describing a lot of my emotional landscape. By the second month, some of the noise died down. That's the thing about other people's opinions. They feel like weather when you're inside them. Then one day you realize most of those people have moved on to somebody else's mess. Work got easier because I had no choice. I took on extra hours, partly because I needed to repair my reputation with my boss, and partly because being useful at something concrete felt better than sitting in my apartment, conducting little private trials where I was both defendant and hostile witness. I got through the hospital audit. I fixed a billing error nobody else had caught. My boss started using her normal tone with me again, which I'm pretty sure is corporate language for congratulations on resuming personhood. The guilt didn't let up, though. Not really. I'd be in the grocery store and instinctively reach for the brandless fruit snacks he liked, then stand there with the box in my hand feeling idiotic. I'd hear a kid in the next apartment laughing and feel my body go alert before my brain caught up. Once I drove past his school by accident because I was distracted, and seeing the little line of children at pickup time made me have to pull into a pharmacy parking lot to stop shaking. There are some losses you can dramatize cleanly. Fiancé lies, woman leaves, end scene. Losing a child who was never legally yours but had started living in your nervous system is uglier and harder to explain. My mother remained deeply committed to proving that even my heartbreak could become a lesson about my temperament. She invited me to dinner one Sunday and managed, within 20 minutes, to suggest that if I had been more flexible from the start, maybe the ex-wife wouldn't have seen me as a threat, and maybe the man I almost married wouldn't have felt he needed to hide things. Imagine hearing that with mashed potatoes in your mouth. I put my fork down and stared at her so long she finally asked what. I said really quietly that I had spent my whole life being asked to absorb other people's bad behavior gracefully, and I was done auditioning for sainthood in a family that only respected women when they were swallowing glass silently. My mother started crying, of course. Not because she had hurt me, because I had spoken plainly in a tone she disliked. My sister took her side immediately. She said I was rewriting history because I couldn't handle that I had made a bad situation worse. We got into the kind of kitchen argument that makes every childhood role slide right back into place. She became the sensible one, I became the emotional one, our mother became the wounded referee, and I suddenly felt 15 again, trying to explain why a boundary wasn't the same thing as a tantrum. I left before dessert and turned my phone off for the rest of the night. That was the first time in my adult life I considered that maybe keeping peace with my family had cost me more than losing them ever would. A few days after that, one of the wives from his friend group sent me a longer message than usual. She said she knew things had gotten ugly and didn't expect me to answer, but she wanted me to know the boy was safe with his grandparents part of the week, and with his parents the rest. That should have comforted me. It did a little. Then she added that he asked about me often and still called the second bedroom at my apartment his room. I had to put my phone face down on my desk and go cry in the office bathroom like a 19-year-old intern dumped by a drummer. I replied later with the only honest thing I had. I said I knew I had hurt him. I said that part would stay with me. She wrote back, "He was hurt before you called. Everyone was just pretending otherwise." That sentence sat in my chest for days. Around the same time, I started noticing small cracks in the story his side had been telling. Not enough to vindicate me in some cinematic reveal way. Real life is ruder than that. But little things. One friend who had been frosty suddenly unfollowed both him and his ex-wife. Another stopped replying to the group messages my sister had somehow gained access to through mutual acquaintances, because boundaries are apparently decorative in half the people I know. A woman I'd met twice at barbecues viewed every story I posted for 2 weeks straight, like she was conducting surveillance with anxiety. You can feel a social circle turning even before you know why. It's like hearing drywall shift. Then, on a rainy Thursday night when I was in sweatpants eating cereal for dinner because adulthood had clearly peaked already, I found an unread message buried in requests on that same social media app where I'd first seen the beach photos. It was from a woman in the group. Not a close friend. More like somebody's partner I had exchanged polite patio small talk with 3 times. Her message started with, "I'm sorry to do this over text," which is never how good news begins. She said her boyfriend had told her more than he should have after an argument, and she felt sick keeping it from me. She said what happened on the trip was worse than I knew. She said my ex-fiancé and his ex-wife had been flirting openly the whole week in a way that made several people uncomfortable. She said there was one night, after too many drinks, when they disappeared for a while together and came back separately. She said the boyfriend had admitted there had been talk in the group before the trip too. Little jokes and looks everybody pretended not to notice because nobody wanted to be the person who blew up 2 households and an engagement. I read her message 4 times. My hands went numb in that creepy way where they still function but don't feel connected to you. Then I called her, because some pain deserves a human voice. She answered immediately like she had been waiting. She sounded nervous, guilty, and weirdly relieved. She confirmed everything. No, she hadn't seen them have sex. No, nobody had filmed anything, because thank God these people weren't full demons. But yes, there had been enough behavior that the now former fiancé of the ex-wife had confronted someone in the group. Yes, people had been covering for them. Yes, she had wanted to tell me earlier, but her boyfriend begged her not to get involved. I thanked her, which felt bizarre. Then I hung up and sat very still on my couch with my cereal turning to paste in the bowl beside me. Vindication is such a scam. You think if you're proven right, the whole structure of what hurt you will reorganize into something cleaner. It doesn't. It just adds another room to the ruin. I had been right that the beach photos were not innocent. Right that the lie was bigger than the explanation at my door. Right that their whole little circle had treated me like a replaceable support beam. And none of that changed the boy crying at my door, or the call I made, or the fact that I still missed a child who no longer belonged in my life. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m, I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do anymore, which was reopen old messages and reread them like a detective with no badge and too much mascara history. There were so many little places where the truth had leaked through if I'd been less invested in being chosen. The vague scheduling changes. The times he got defensive when I asked ordinary questions. The weird tenderness he still reserved for his ex-wife when she was upset, even while insisting it was all about co-parenting. Looking back is a mean hobby. It turns you into your own worst commenter. The next day I called the former fiancé of his ex-wife. I had never been close to him. We had met at birthdays and school things and one awkward pumpkin patch trip where half the adults were pretending not to notice weird emotional geometry. But I still had his number from a group thread about a fundraiser for the boy's medical bills months earlier. I stared at it for a long time before calling because I wasn't sure whether I was being brave, petty, or lonely. Probably all 3. He answered on the second ring sounding tired in a deep, lived-in way. I said my name, And he actually let out this short, humorless laugh like he'd been expecting my call since the universe was invented. I told him I had heard some things and didn't want gossip. Just clarity. He was quiet for a second, then said he already knew. He had ended the engagement the week before. Somebody from the trip had confessed enough to make the rest obvious. He didn't give me a dramatic speech. That almost made it worse. He just spoke like a man who had finished being surprised and moved on to inventory. Yes, there had been signs before. Yes, he had ignored them because every sign had a tidy explanation available if you wanted one badly enough. No, he didn't think the trip was the first time they crossed lines, just the first time people stopped pretending not to see it. He said he was sorry for my part in it, then added, kind of grimly, that their son had been used as a bridge for a long time, an excuse for closeness, a reason they could stay entangled without naming what they were doing. That sentence messed me up for days, because it lined up with something I hadn't wanted to admit even to myself. There were moments, small at the time, when I had felt like the boys' needs were being used to force emotional access between adults who hadn't earned it from each other. A doctor's appointment turning into a family lunch I wasn't told about until the last minute. A school event where they stood together laughing while I held the backpack and snacks off to the side like unpaid staff. An emergency pickup that somehow became the three of us in a parking lot, discussing weekend plans while the child, the alleged reason for all this blending, sat in the back seat watching cartoons through sticky fingerprints. None of it was criminal. None of it was movie-level dramatic. It was just intimate in a way that denied its own intimacy. I wanted to hate both of them cleanly after that. I really did. Hate is energizing. It gives shape to grief. But what I mostly felt was tired. Tired that I had doubted myself so hard I needed strangers to verify my reality. Tired that a child I loved had become collateral in adult dishonesty. Tired that my own family had looked at the situation and still found a way to ask whether I could have smiled more while being used. A week later, his grandmother called me from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. When I heard her voice, my throat closed up immediately. She said she hoped it was okay that she was calling and that if I wanted her to hang up, she would. I said no. It's okay. Which was generous considering I burst into tears 2 sentences later. She didn't apologize for him. That was the first reason I could speak to her at all. She said what happened should not have happened. She said adults had made selfish choices, and then acted shocked that there were consequences. She said the boy was doing all right medically and was settling back into routine. Then, very carefully, she said he still asked about me sometimes, but less now. Less now. Those 2 words hit with a kind of mercy I wasn't prepared for. She also said something else I needed, even if it didn't fix anything. She said, "You were scared, and scared people sometimes do the safest thing they can think of, not the prettiest." Coming from her, it felt like somebody finally acknowledged the actual moment instead of the version people had built afterward. I told her I was sorry for how confusing it had been for him. I told her I would always be sorry for that. She said she knew. Then she told me there was no plan to push contact because routine mattered. But she wanted me to know I hadn't been erased from the story in their house. After we hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and cried in a way that felt almost clean for once. Not long after that, my mother invited herself over. She arrived with grocery store flowers and a casserole, which in her language means I have decided to resume diplomacy without admitting I was wrong. I let her in because I was tired and because a petty streak can only carry me so far when somebody shows up with hot food. We sat at my table under the ugly overhead light, and for a while we talked about nothing. Work, the weather, my brother changing jobs. Then she finally said she had heard more of the truth from somebody who knew somebody in that friend group. Amazing how facts become more credible once a chain of distant social approval gets stapled to them. She said maybe she had been too hard on me. Maybe. I almost applauded. Then she started crying again and talking about how she only wanted me to be secure, how she worried that I ruined something permanent over pride, how she never wanted me to end up alone because I could be sharp when I was hurt. There it was. The same old family language dressed in concern. I interrupted her, which felt like standing up inside my own skin. I said being alone was not the worst thing that had almost happened to me. Becoming the kind of woman who accepts lying because she's scared of losing a seat at the table was worse. She got very quiet after that. We didn't solve our history in one casserole conversation. Thank God. I don't trust endings that tidy. But something shifted. Maybe because I finally said the quiet part out loud. Maybe because she was old enough now to see some of herself in the men she used to excuse. Maybe because shame had finally become inconvenient for her too. Whatever the reason, she left without telling me to be nicer. That counted. My sister was slower to come around, mostly because she hates being second to any emotional revelation. She sent a text 2 days later saying she still thought I handled some of it badly, but she admitted he was trash. That was the apology. I laughed for a full minute. In some families, growth comes with tears and a hug. In mine, it arrives wearing boots and pretending it was always headed here. By late fall, my lease was up. I decided not to renew, not because the apartment was cursed, but because every corner of it had become a little museum exhibit about almost. The wall where we measured where a bigger sofa could go after the wedding. The kitchen counter where the pill bottles had stood. The second bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to one patch of ceiling, because the boy had cried when one fell down, and I had promised I'd replace them properly later. Later turned out to be one of those imaginary countries adults keep booking trips to and never visit. So I moved across town to a smaller place above a hair salon where the floors creaked and the water pressure was tragic, but nobody there knew my business. The first night in the new apartment, I ate takeout on the floor and listened to strangers laughing outside, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not joy. I'm not going to insult you with fake empowerment glitter. It was more like relief without witnesses. A quiet room that belonged only to me. No ex-wife orbit. No child-sized toothbrush in my cup. No door I expected a liar to knock on. I also started therapy, which I had been threatening to do for years like it was a rebellious haircut. My therapist had the patience of a saint and the face of a woman who had heard every variation of "I'm not usually like this" from people exactly like me. In one of our first sessions, I told her I couldn't stop replaying the call I made. The transfer, the look on the boy's face. I said I knew why I had done it, but knowing wasn't the same as forgiving myself. She asked me what I thought would have happened if I had kept him there indefinitely while waiting for a man who was lying to me. I said I don't know. She said exactly. Safety decisions often feel ugly when made in real time. That didn't erase the guilt, but it gave it less room to cosplay as proof of my evil. She also pointed out something I hated hearing because it was true. She said I had spent a lot of energy asking whether I overreacted in the final moment, and very little asking why I tolerated so many smaller violations before it. That question followed me home like a stray cat. Why had I translated discomfort into maturity? Why had I treated my own unease like a personality flaw to be managed? Why had it felt more natural to doubt myself than the man actively lying to me? Some of those answers had his face. A lot of them had my mother's. Winter came in mean and gray. My brother helped me assemble cheap bookshelves in the new place and didn't ask too many questions when he found me crying over a box labeled bedroom stars. My mother started calling before dropping by, which may not sound impressive unless you know her. My sister and I found a cautious rhythm built mostly out of shared sarcasm and deliberately avoiding the topic of my failed engagement unless one of us had enough wine to be honest. Life didn't improve in a montage. It just got less raw by inches. I heard one final update about them through the same annoying social pipeline that delivers all modern tragedy. He and his ex-wife never officially got back together, at least not in the grand romantic way people post about. That somehow felt perfectly on brand. People like that don't always choose each other cleanly. Sometimes they just keep wrecking the edges of everybody else's life while insisting they're doing their best. Last I heard, they were in the same orbit, still entangled, still explaining themselves differently depending on the audience. I didn't need details after that. Whatever they were, they could be at somewhere far away from my front door. Every now and then, I still think about the boy at odd times, in the grocery store near the cereal aisle, walking past a school playground. When I see those little winter gloves clipped to jackets with the world's tiniest plastic clasps. Grief is embarrassing like that. It doesn't arrive with violins. It shows up when you're buying dish soap. I keep the drawing he left under my doormat in a folder with important papers, which is objectively unhinged but less depressing than keeping it in a shrine-like drawer. Once in a while, I take it out, look at the 3 figures holding hands, and put it back before I can invent a future that was never actually mine. The last time he tried to contact me was almost a year after the beach trip. An email, 3 lines long, sent late at night from an address I didn't recognize until I saw the signature. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said he knew he had hurt me. He said he still thought about the life we almost had. I read it once, then twice, mostly out of anthropological interest. There was still no real accountability in it. No sentence that fully named what he had done. No acknowledgement that his son had paid for his cowardice too. Just that same soft-focus regret men sometimes use when they want to revisit the feeling of being loved without standing in the full light of why they lost it. I deleted it. That might be the least dramatic choice I made in the whole story, but it's the one I'm proudest of. Not because it made me feel powerful, Honestly, I felt kind of sick afterward. Closing a door for real is quieter than people tell you. No music, no speech, just your hand moving and the room staying exactly as it was. But I was done turning my pain into a discussion forum for people who had already shown me how little clarity mattered to them. These days, my life is smaller than the one I thought I was building, but it fits better. I work, I pay my bills, I call my brother back. I sometimes let my mother annoy me in manageable doses. And I have gotten very good at leaving the second a situation starts asking me to betray myself politely. I'm not healed in the glossy way people post about. I still have a nasty reflex for self-doubt. I still wonder whether there was any version of that week where the child at the center of it all came out untouched. Probably not. That's the answer I hate and trust at the same time. But I also know this now. Loving a child does not obligate you to stay available for the adults using him to hold your place. Being understanding is not the same thing as being lied to quietly. And sometimes the choice that leaves the ugliest bruise on your conscience is still the one that keeps you from disappearing inside somebody else's mess. I wish I could tie it up nicer than that. I wish I could say everybody learned something beautiful and grew in a straight line, and now I never wake up angry or guilty or suddenly sad because a cartoon shark in a store bin catches my eye. That would be easier. It would also be a lie, and I've had enough of those to last the rest of my life. So no, I didn't get the wedding. I didn't get the little family I thought I was earning through patience and compromise and all the mature language women use when we're secretly begging reality to reward us for being low maintenance. What I got was uglier and more useful. I learned what it feels like when your own instincts are trying to save you and you keep asking them to lower their voice. I learned that some people confuse access with entitlement. I learned that love can be real and still not be safe. And I learned, very late but not too late, that I would rather be the difficult woman in somebody else's story than the easy woman disappearing inside it.